Welcome, everyone. Today, we are going to discuss how to navigate the potentially challenging interpersonal dynamics you may encounter in your CSC work. Or to put a positive frame on it, we'll talk about how to cultivate collaboration. So I've built in plenty of time for questions discussion at the end. So please write down any questions that come up and hold them till then, if you would. So all of us are on our own learning curve when it comes to skillful navigation of interpersonal dynamics. And as you've no doubt observed, figuring out how to better negotiate interactions with those we work with and the powers that be serve us just as much, if not more, than mastering the technical difficulties required to complete the CSC actions. Relationship is the subtext of our work, no matter how purely rational we wish things could be. So different personalities are attracted to municipal work in official or volunteer capacities for different reasons. Some simply seem to want to do good, get things done, serve and improve their communities. Others appear to be driven more by ego and the opportunity to exercise power and control. It's easy to get into conflicts with people who have this kind of motivation, as you probably observed. And of course, there's also, conflicts that arise from your run-of-the-mill differences of opinion. So we'll dig a little deeper into all of this. If people seem mainly motivated by power, it doesn't mean that they don't also want to do good. But motivation of power for power's sake and motivation to do good can often clash. So it's helpful to be reminded that you are likely to encounter this. Variations on the theme might look like a supervisor whose leadership style is to micromanage, a town board member who isn't curious, a good listener, or a complex thinker and always shoots things down, a village trustee who doesn't believe in climate change, a town board member who is tight with the budget and sees climate efforts as frivolous, and very commonly, an official who is exhausted, jaded, and spread too thin, who always says they can't take on anything new because they don't have the bandwidth. All of these people can put up obstacles for you. But take comfort that if you're confronting this or anything like it, it's not the first time. There are strategies we can learn and create to move you in a positive direction. Ultimately, this takes patience with ourselves and with others. We are constantly projecting onto one another. And at the same time, everyone is doing their best. Even the most infuriating people to you who were seemingly designed to make your life difficult, take comfort. There are ways to succeed at building the world we want to see regardless. And throughout the program, we can support each other to find the opportunities within these frustrations. So here's our agenda for today. First, I'll go over a couple of frameworks, basically maps that chart the emotional terrain underlying our work. And following from that, different strategies for you to consider. Second, I will go through a case study, a story of a thorny situation in a town like yours and how it is actively being surmounted. Next, I will offer you some tested tools and practices. Then we'll take a 5-minute break. And finally, we'll have time to discuss any questions or thoughts the presentation brought up for you and talk through individual challenges that some of you may be sitting with. Since it's requisite to being human, I know that each one of you has encountered tricky interpersonal obstacles as you've strived to accomplish goals that are meaningful to you. You've developed your own wisdom and strategies, I'm very sure. So during the workshopping portion of our session, I'll invite whomever would like to share a past experience of navigating difficult interpersonal dynamics that you think the cohort could benefit from hearing, or share about a particular interpersonal dynamic you are grappling with now, or anticipate as tricky as you pursue your local champion's work. We as a group can help you think through strategies. Since all of you earned your own hard-won lessons, we can benefit from each other's toolboxes. Cultivating support for one another around interpersonal obstacles and leaning on the collective wisdom of the group will go a long way. So does anyone remember this character? It was from the 80s in Saturday Night Live. She was a therapist who this is the only thing that she would say to people no matter what they brought to her, have you looked at yourself? I gave a talk to our pilot cohort last year that went over common personality structures that can be helpful to recognize, such as narcissistically fragile or neurotic and overly controlling personalities. These are descriptions as understood by counselors and psychologists. I gave suggestions on how to cope with classically difficult personality types, what to watch for, how to notice what you feel, and self-regulate when you get triggered. I also went over how to recognize these structures as coping mechanisms and develop empathy instead of just letting their expression drive you bonkers. Honor them. I also covered how to recognize traces of these structures and coping mechanisms in ourselves. I've linked my previous 20-minute talk in the homework section of this session on HVCAN in case you'd like to review it as a complement to what I'll cover today. So now I'll go over some frameworks and strategies. The following framework was taken from a book, Beyond Reason, which is a rubric for using emotions as we negotiate, written by a professional negotiator, Roger Fisher, who teamed up with the psychologist, Daniel Shapiro. So we negotiate every day, whether it is with a partner about whether to stay in and go out or go out, with a child, getting them to do their homework, or with a town board member about the worth of pursuing a greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And we have emotions every day. They won't go away, no matter how hard we try to ignore them. And they profoundly affect our bodies, the way that we think, and the way that we act. Let's say a mercurial town board member who previously seemed open to something you proposed that you worked hard on has now decided she no longer thinks it's a good idea for irrational reasons. You may feel like telling her she doesn't understand what she's talking about. You may accidentally say that in the heat of the moment, making things worse. Or you may not say anything, but seethe with resentment for the rest of the day. None of us are spared the reality of emotions. They can be distracting, distressing, and can be the reason a negotiation falls apart. They can turn a positive relationship into a long-lasting war nobody wins. So let's face it, emotions can be obstacles to negotiation. They can divert your attention from the goals at hand. For instance, if you or the person you are trying to reach an agreement with gets upset, it can shift your focus from working together to going on the defensive or wanting to attack them. Emotions can threaten relationships. Out of irritation, you might interrupt a monologuer who is just about to go with your suggestion. And out of resentment, he may stay quiet and withdraw his support for your ideas in the future. They can also be used to exploit you at times. Despite what you say, people watching closely might be able to pick up what you do and don't value, including your relationship with them, and use it against you. And I'm sure you know emotions can also be powerful assets. Positive emotions make it easier to align your interests with others. They lower fear and suspicion. They encourage listening. Positive emotions enrich relationships too. They foster trust. For instance, you can disagree knowing that respect remains with someone. You can speak freely without worrying that someone is trying to undermine you. And what we all hope, you can enjoy the process. So how can we work with emotions rather than being at the mercy of them in professional situations? Dealing directly with every emotion that arises for you or that you notice in another is unwieldy and likely inappropriate in many professional situations, which is what makes this so tricky. If you try to address each powerful one that obviously comes up, you might be oversharing or making an assumption about how someone is feeling if you try to name it for them. Instead, focus on 5 core concerns that are at the heart of many emotions involved in our efforts to negotiate: appreciation, affiliation, autonomy, status, and role. So signs that your concern for appreciation is ignored are when your thoughts, feelings, or actions are devalued. But this concern is met when your thoughts, feelings, or actions are acknowledged as having merit. Signs that your concern for affiliation with others is ignored when you're treated as an adversary and kept at a distance. The concern is met when you're treated as a colleague. Signs that your concern for autonomy is ignored when your freedom to make decisions is impinged upon. And this concern is met when others respect your freedom to decide important matters. Signs that your concern about status is ignored when your relative standing is treated as inferior to that of others. And this concern is met when your standing, where deserved, is given full recognition. And as I'm describing these, I'm sure you all are thinking about how you might relate to all of these concerns. Signs that you're concerned about your role is ignored are when this concern is when your current role and its activities are not defined or fulfilling. And signs that it's met are when your role is clear and its activities incorporate your skills, interests, values, and beliefs. So if core concerns are unmet, these are the ways you or others may feel: unappreciated, treated as an adversary, your autonomy is impinged upon, you feel your status is put down, and your role is unclear and restricted. And when this is the atmosphere, people are prone to react negatively, contrary to their interests. They're prone to go it alone, to think rigidly and be defensive, and to act deceptively and be seen as untrustworthy. If the core concerns are met, you and others will likely feel the opposite: that you're appreciated, that you're treated as a colleague, that you have freedom to decide, that your freedom to decide is acknowledged, your status is recognized where deserved, and that your role is defined and it includes activities that convince you that you make a difference. And then you're much more likely to cooperate, to work with others, to be creative, and to be trustworthy. So that's one framework I want to offer. And so I'm going to just move on to a different framework now. During the Local Champions pilot, we worked with consultants from a group called Regenesis. They offer tools that support a local approach to solving climate issues. They believe, as Vanessa and I do, that working locally has many advantages because, as they put it, a single particular place is the only scale at which the interface between people and natural systems is immediate and accessible. They teach ways to work both on ourselves and with others to surmount interpersonal obstacles. Vanessa and I joked that they were therapists for climate activists. And we really valued what they brought, but we decided not to work with them in this cycle in order to allow you all maximum focus on the tasks before you. However, this group has depth. They offer valuable perspectives and help some of our alumni to approach thorny issues in new and effective ways. So I will lay out a few of their basic tenets in case you find them helpful and would like to explore more of their videos and writings on your own. So regenerative development is defined by them, is about seizing the potential born of crisis for transforming our roles as planners, climate activists, and citizens. In particular, it is about learning how, in an increasingly unpredictable world, We can enable the places where we live, work, and the places where we live and work to thrive, not just to sustain a precarious balance. Two main pillars of the Regenesis approach are to be aware of where you're coming from when you engage others. And then when you engage others, to think about working with possibility rather than just playing whack-a-mole by problem solving. So all of you, as people who face the reality of climate change and work to mend the problems, we might often feel it as we're just holding together what we can, trying to keep the last of things from being destroyed. Most of us work to prevent bad things from happening instead of working toward the world we would love to create. So how can we work regeneratively versus just fight degeneration? Regenesis principles invite us to shift from working on problems to working on potential. Climate issues are seen as a problem, which connects to shame and blame. But as I just went over in the last section about the power of eliciting positive emotions, rather than negative ones from stakeholders, your work will be more effective and sustainable when you activate people's will around things they value, around a vision or exciting potential that could benefit everyone in your community rather than activating people through fear. So Regenesis offers ways to think about the systems within which we live, natural and social, as whole, rather than as fragmented problem people might work on in silos. So looking at climate change in a global way elicits overwhelm. Instead, ask, what is the potential of these places we live, work in, and care about? And how can we get more people joining with us to work on that? Kind of the basement is working on climate change, but the larger motivation is wanting to avoid the tragedy of unrealized potential, like the unrealized potential of a child. So, okay, here's how you do it. Their premise is that it's easier to work on divisive issues if we can begin from a place of shared caring and potential. To help people find the need for new technologies instead of being insistent about the need. Build a buzz in the community that will create momentum with officials eager to please residents and gain votes. Engage people from where they are energized. Help them see their stake in the solar project, GHG inventory, comprehensive planning process, whatever project you endeavor. You will get more buy-in this way. And so you can start by asking questions. Instead of talking people into things or bringing up climate change off the bat, find out what it is they already care about. Help them see what they value is connected to your efforts. People may not know that they care about renewable energy, but as we've discussed, they may like smaller energy bills. Here's some questions to tease that out. What do you love about this place? What is your history with it? Where do you take visitors? Why do you stay here? Just avoid politics or debates about climate change. Start with the topic of home because it's safe. Okay, so now I'm going to share a case study in the town of Ankrum. Personality conflict, bullying, sexism, and discrimination all amplify the challenges of climate work. And unfortunately, Vanessa and I both experience and see these things happening across many municipalities. However, I want to share an encouraging story of what took place in Ankrum when the people there encountered these sorts of problems. But let me be clear, this is a story about things that went really off the rails. I'm not recommending that you follow their process preventatively, but I wanted you to know that there is a precedent for what to do if things get really bad. Ankrum is transforming a difficult situation into a better one, and it can be a touchstone for us of an extreme. So I read about the following story in a series of articles in the Columbia paper and then spoke with two people involved. Some of you may know about it. last winter, on January 20th, Jack Lindsay, who is the chair of Ancrum's ethics board, went to a town board meeting to bring up complaints he had been fielding and to suggest that the town consider updating its harassment training. He explained to the board that in the past year and a half, he had received 15 calls and had several other conversations with both men and women who shared their concerns with him about dismissive, sometimes hostile or inappropriate treatment of women who serve the town. The women explained lost opportunities or ways that they had been treated, quote, poorly, even threateningly by men in positions of authority in the town. Jack had tried to go to the board before the meeting, but the concerns were dismissed. He was told that the claims were blown out of proportion by 3 women. However, in speaking at the January 20th meeting, he explained that many more women than 3 experienced this, but were scared to come forward. Many town residents attended the meeting. And ultimately, Jack proposed that the town form an equality council to handle matters like this. He told the board that, quote, by not aggressively answering these concerns, you're jeopardizing the great and thoughtful progress Ancrum has achieved in the last years under your administration and the much needed vibrant contributions of the women in our community. So Supervisor Art Basson appreciated what Jack laid out and said that the matter would be discussed again at the next board meeting. Excuse me. So by the February town board meeting, Supervisor Basson said the town was taking these complaints very seriously and had hired a lawyer to investigate the matter. By April, the lawyer concluded that no laws or ethics codes had been broken, but that the complaints were sincere and widespread. By May, the town board voted to form a committee for respectful behavior. 2 councilwomen, with the help of an ad hoc committee, did research into best practices, developing qualifications for the proposed committee, and drafting a respectful workplace policy or code of conduct. I spoke with Jack Lindsay and Councilwoman Bonnie Hunt. They shared that a key issue was that, like many towns, Ancrum had a handbook, but it was not up to date in terms of enforceable wording. Also, the harassment training that Ancrum gave, mandated by the state, is quite limited. And mainly, there are no mechanisms in place to handle the disruption caused by this type of behavior. Every employee gets a handbook and a copy of the Ancrum's ethics law, and they sign a document stating that they have read it and understood it, and that they know who to call if they have a question, but there's not an adequate process to address bad behavior. So Ancrum has now officially established a committee for respectful behavior. 6 people who have stepped, there are 6 people who stepped up. The committee is composed of 3 men and 3 women. And amazingly, the majority of these Ancrum residents have backgrounds working on diversity training for organizations and businesses. Bonnie said that there's a lot of resources out there on this front. Ancrum just hadn't had access to them. So the committee has met 3 times. They're refining a draft code of conduct and looking into supplementary training programs. Bonnie is impressed with the committee and hopeful about what they've come up with. Their challenge now is to develop a process and policy for how to address complaints when they arise. People are worried about the committee handling investigations. The committee doesn't have training in that process. However, trainings are available for how to do that and handle the basics. And they are looking at that so they can handle complaints up to a certain threshold. Then they'll likely reach out to a third party if it's needed. Mainly, she expects the committee to make recommendations to the board. And the press is closely watching the situation, so developments will be reported. So I asked her for her advice for municipal volunteers encountering this kind of bullying, or any kind of bullying, not just sexism. She suggested that if you learn, if you have a place to go if you have a complaint. But that process sometimes sends you to the supervisor, and they could be the problem. So find out if there's a process. But she suggested that also, if there's a way to confront people directly, this is sometimes the most efficient route. She thinks that sometimes all it takes is to let people know they said something hurtful in a non-shaming way with allies around. Basically, like, you said this and it made me feel like this. She also shared that at the January meeting, many women publicly shared their experiences after Jack spoke, including one who had quit the planning board years ago because of the way she was treated. She had quietly felt wounded since, but speaking about it at the meeting was powerful for others to hear who had known why she quit, and helped her resolve her feelings and find peace. So what can we learn from Ankram's example? Talk to others. How do they feel about the work that's being done or the behavior you think is unacceptable? Form a consensus through relationship and support. If you are facing an extreme situation, then you can consider some of the solutions Ankram is creating. However, as it may be obvious, this is the nuclear option. So be aware that it's tricky to attempt. If there isn't enough support to follow through, you could lose a lot of political capital. So sometimes it's best to start, where Bonnie suggested, to try to deal with it directly. You could go on a walk with someone and gently let them know that what they said was hurtful, try to create a rapport. Or if that seems too difficult, be straightforward about how a comment made you feel in the safety of witnesses. And people can really never argue with the way that you feel. If you start telling them what you think was wrong with what they did, they can argue with you. But if you just state how you feel, they really can't. So you can also act preventatively by initiating an intentional process with your task force. Start a discussion about how you want to work together. In the homework section of this session on HBCAN, I've linked to a document you can use to think through how to initiate a conversation like this. So the results of a group talk can be something to later reference if conflicts come up, or to share with volunteers as they join your task force. You can broach the topic with questions and invite everyone to respond. And you might think about, if this appeals to you or you think you'd like to do this, think about the setting where you might want to do this. Would it be, would the group feel most comfortable in someone's backyard or at town hall, or at a bar? And you could ask people, what will help us maintain good communication? What courtesies set us up for success? What's important to people about how we treat each other? What are the elements of the culture we want to create together? What motivates the different members to participate? So that can really be helpful to know. It'll help you understand people and where they're coming from. What do they each want to get out of the time they contribute? And what are their hopes for the work? So I'll leave you with just a few more tools before we talk together that can help keep the peace and bring order and acceleration to your process. I'm going to go over a few forms of direct democracy for those of you who may not be familiar with them. So in Austerlitz, I'm on the task force in Austerlitz up here in Columbia County. Climate committee meetings often devolved into circular conversations. And so the coordinator created a survey using Google Forms and sent the questions she needed answers to in concise multiple choice structures. The majority answers determined the decision, and it was very helpful to move things forward. And I'll link to that survey in the homework. If you haven't before, and this is something I actually recently became aware of, or we recently started to do in our climate committee and task force, during a committee meeting, you can make a motion that the committee discuss or vote on something. You do this by saying, I move that X. In order for it to be carried out, someone needs to second your motion. And they do so by saying second or I second the motion. If no one does that, the presiding officer should say, is there a second? And if there is, that presiding officer can also say, is there discussion? So in this way, you can formally call for discussion or a vote in a committee. Something a bit more complex is maybe some of you have heard about citizens' assemblies. So a citizens' assembly is a tool being used to get past political gridlock on climate and other important issues. And here's how it works. People are selected in a democratic lottery, so they are impartial and truly representative of the population. These people investigate solutions to an issue in their local area in depth by hearing from a broad range of experts. And their process is guided by trained facilitators. They have honest conversations together to get to the root of the problem and to get to consensus on solutions. This heavily weighted consensus can then be used to recommend policy for lawmakers to pass. So citizens' assemblies are gaining popularity around the world as a way to solve difficult problems. Sorry, I've got the train here. Oh, yeah. It's a long one. Okay, so they're really gaining popularity around the world as a way to solve difficult problems that politicians often can't because they're pressured by their parties, lobbyists, sensationalist media, their campaign strategies and fundraising needs. But for instance, Ireland used citizens' assemblies to break gridlock on same-sex marriage and abortion. The Irish Parliament also passed a ban on oil and gas exploration in February of 2021 as a result of recommendations from a citizens' assembly. So another form of that that is local is Ecological Citizens Project is an organization based in Phillipstown, New York. Down in Putnam County, we had Jason Angel come speak to our pilot cohort, who's great. He started Ecological Citizens Project, and he explained to us that they facilitated what are called community congress processes. So they facilitated one in the town of Phillipstown in 2017 and another in the city of Peekskill in 2019. And this consisted of organizing and publicizing a community meeting at which citizens were encouraged to propose their best ideas to move the community forward. All ideas were documented on a list and sent to all residents to vote on. And they had this really fun event where the community came out, they had a mic, they served food and beer, and people stood up and explained their ideas. And later a ballot went out. So over the course of the Phillipstown and Peekskill initiatives, 75 community residents proposed community priorities, 2,284 cast ballots, and 1,340 people signed up to volunteer on initiatives that were voted as priorities. Any city resident 13 years or older in the Peekskill Community Congress was allowed to participate, and nearly half of the ballots were cast by 13 to 17-year-olds, with the top voted priority proposed by youth. So these people-centered democratic models have sparked ongoing community action around a range of issues. In Phillipstown, these efforts included the initiation of their Climate Smart Communities work and the appointment of a comprehensive plan update committee. In Peekskill, efforts included early voting initiatives, shaping of the mayor's agenda around youth employment, and Peekskill's $10 million downtown revitalization initiative.